When my wife was 29 years old, she scheduled her second ever gynecologist appointment and I was 35. Typically, she would text me incessantly and inform me of her whereabouts, but on this particular day, she did not respond to any of my messages until 3 hours after her appointment. Upon my return from work, I noticed that she was avoiding eye contact and keeping herself occupied by doing laundry. I managed to confront her and inquire about her unusual behavior. She immediately burst into tears and revealed that she felt uneasy during her doctor's visit earlier that day. I inquired further, and my wife disclosed that during her gynecologist appointment, the doctor had strapped her feet down in the stirrups and engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior with her. Upon hearing this, I was overcome with rage and began pacing and yelling. I formulated a plan to take legal action against the doctor. However, my wife hesitated before revealing that something else had occurred. The doctor had also engaged in sexual intercourse with her while she was restrained on the table. Despite her apparent distress, I sensed that she was not completely upset and was trying to mask her true emotions. I was deeply saddened by my wife's revelation, but I chose to hide my perception of her facade. Perhaps it was because I didn't want to accuse her of willingly engaging in a sexual relationship with her doctor. Instead, I suggested that we take legal action against him for malpractice. When I brought up the idea, my wife seemed embarrassed and uneasy. She insisted that we didn't need to pursue this route, and that she simply wouldn't return to that doctor. I expressed my disagreement and stressed that he needed to be held accountable for his actions. What if he had done this to other women? My wife appeared dumbfounded by my question and was at a loss for words. The following day, I was surprised to find my wife preparing to go to work as usual. However, I chose to stay home and began searching for a lawyer to handle our case. Just as I was about to make a call, I noticed that my wife's iPad was left unattended and curiosity got the best of me. Upon checking it, I discovered a notification from someone labeled as L on her WhatsApp. They had arranged to meet at an out-of-town location during the last hour of her workday. My wife had replied with a winking face and confirmed that she could leave work early. When the person asked if she had told anyone about the previous day's events, she swore that she had not. This discovery frightened me to the core. I immediately sensed that my wife was keeping something from me after discovering her suspicious WhatsApp messages. After checking the time, I realized that I had several hours before her planned meeting. I decided to seek the advice of a divorce lawyer regarding the matter and discuss what my best course of action might be given the circumstances. He agreed that her behavior was peculiar and recommended that I gather evidence to confirm my suspicions. While he suggested hiring a private investigator, I decided to take matters into my own hands and head to the meeting location myself. Along the way, I purchased a GPS tracker. My heart was pounding as I waited nervously in my car parked outside a high-end restaurant. It was likely that my wife and her companion had chosen the fancy restaurant to avoid being recognized. When I arrived, I spotted my wife sitting at a table for two near the front window, looking anxious. As I waited in my car, my emotions overwhelmed me, and I found myself shedding tears. A wealthy-looking man in a nice car arrived shortly after and entered the restaurant to join my wife at the table. After composing myself, I stepped out of the car and discreetly attached the GPS tracker to my wife's vehicle. While keeping a safe distance, I managed to take pictures of them conversing and eating carefree at the table, hiding behind a nearby car. Once they got into their respective cars, I waited in mine until my wife and the other man began driving. I followed them from a safe distance to a hotel, circling around to the other side to avoid detection. Unsure of how long to wait before approaching, I paced outside the entrance for a moment. Finally, I positioned myself by the automatic doors and managed to snap a clear photo of them at the check-in counter without tripping the motion sensor. The sight made me sick to my stomach, and I had to resist the overwhelming urge to confront the man in that moment. I parked my car in the front parking lot, far from the hotel entrance. After zooming in on my camera, I placed it on the dashboard, pointing it directly at the entrance. I began recording 10 minutes later, and soon after, my wife and her lover emerged hand in hand. They exchanged a goodbye kiss before getting into their respective cars, which I captured along with screenshots of their incriminating conversation. With enough proof of their affair, I filed for divorce and returned home before my wife. Upon her arrival, she greeted me with the same warmth as always, completely oblivious to the truth. In response, I thrust the divorce papers in her face. She gasped and demanded to know what was going on. I informed her that it was I who deserved answers, and that I had evidence of her infidelity. Her face drained of color as she asked me what I was talking about. I refused to reveal the details of my knowledge, instead insisting that she tell me the truth. Though she tried to feign ignorance, her inability to make eye contact or speak above a whisper gave away her guilt completely. I threatened to post the picture of her and the doctor on social media if she didn't confess. As she began to panic, I recorded our conversation. She refused to believe that I had a picture and stared at me in disbelief, but I assured her that I did, and showed it to her on the camera. She tried to grab it from me, leading to a brief struggle. Ultimately, I managed to retrieve the evidence and locked myself in the bedroom with it. After she stopped screaming and pounding on the door, I demanded that she sign the divorce papers and leave the house. I warned her that unless she listened to me, I would post the evidence I had. After a few minutes of loud protesting, she left the room. Uncertain of her whereabouts, I decided to share the proof on her social media account. As she faced severe online criticism, she scrambled to find a place to stay. Over the next several months, she bounced between various locations, including abandoned buildings, while we battled it out in court. Meanwhile, her lover's medical license was revoked, and he relocated. Without any witnesses, he escaped any criminal charges. My former partner remains without a home, regretful for the brief affair that caused her to lose everything. Despite any temptation to help her, I have instead sought counseling and pursued new hobbies. I have decided to share my experience because I want others to know that they are not alone in these kinds of situations, and that things can and do improve. Great work, Op. My response: I am extremely proud of you for how you dealt with the situation. Not only did justice catch up with your unfaithful partner, but with her lover as well. Op, please continue to take the necessary time to heal from this experience. Remember that things will eventually look up for you. Moving on to our second story for today, I would like to express my gratitude for this community, which has been a great source of help and support. I would like to share a shortened version of my story. My ex-wife and I were together for 6 years before we tied the knot in June 2021. During the pandemic, despite the challenges, we managed to have a beautiful wedding, and it was one of the happiest days of my life. After a few months had passed, my wife underwent a significant change. While I continued to work from home, she chose to go to the office regularly, as she was employed by a large company. Although longer work hours were typical for her job, she began to neglect our quality time together on weekends and spent a lot of time with her horse. Additionally, she started to belittle my accomplishments and claimed that I was no longer ambitious, despite my success at work. Many people warn that the first year of marriage can be a challenge, so I made an effort to take my wife on regular date nights to reignite our relationship. However, despite my efforts, she remained aloof and critical, causing a significant blow to my self-esteem. I agonized over what I might have done to cause her behavior and feelings, but I couldn't find any reasonable explanation. As a result, I struggled to sleep and became consumed with the fear of losing my wife to another person. These months were incredibly difficult for me, because I never imagined that I could lose the person I married so soon after our wedding. I convinced myself that the reason for my wife's behavior was the stress of her job. In an effort to avoid worsening our issues, I chose to ignore the negative thoughts and suppress them. Unbeknownst to me, my wife was actually gaslighting me throughout this time. Despite my suspicions, I planned a romantic weekend by the beach to try and rekindle our relationship. Unfortunately, instead of improving things, her contempt for me only grew stronger. On the day of our dinner, I expressed my love for her, but she did not reciprocate. Later that same evening, my wife asked me to take a NSFB photo of her in a bubble bath. When I expressed concern that the photo might be too risky for social media, she brushed it off, saying it wasn't intended for that purpose. Although we had been physically intimate throughout our marriage, my wife refused to be intimate with me during the trip. This behavior only fueled my suspicions, and I eventually confronted her about it, demanding that she be truthful with me. At first, she denied everything, but I persisted, even though I didn't have any concrete proof. Eventually, she came clean and confessed. During our confrontation, my wife finally admitted to having an affair with her boss for several months. She also revealed that he had been pressuring her to leave me. The news triggered a panic attack, something I had never experienced before. Once I had calmed down, I realized how foolish my wife was for falling for his lies. I told her that I planned to inform his wife about the affair. She responded by saying that the wife would find out, but I wouldn't be the one to tell her. This response was a clear indication that my ex-wife had convinced herself that she would run away with her boss. It was a sick and manipulative behavior that made me realize that the person I had married was not who I thought she was. After my wife admitted to having an affair with her boss, she took control of the situation. She changed my flight that night, sent me to my parents' house, and informed me that she would mail me some boxes of my clothes. As soon as I arrived at the airport, I contacted the boss's wife via social media, and things spiraled out of control from there. It turned out that the boss never had any intention of leaving his family. In an attempt to salvage his marriage, he distanced himself from my ex-wife as quickly as possible. HR had to get involved, and my ex-wife quickly gained a reputation around her office. Despite my ex-wife's tearful pleas for reconciliation, I made it clear that her infidelity had sealed the fate of our marriage. In the aftermath of the divorce, I was determined to move forward and find happiness. Thankfully, things have turned out well for me. I now reside near some of my closest friends, have met a wonderful new partner, and have landed a great job in California. Through this experience, I have learned to value and love myself again. I have come to understand that my ex-wife's negative opinions of me during our marriage do not define my worth as a person. Ultimately, success has been the best form of revenge, and I am grateful for the new life I have built. I am much happier now that she's no longer in my life, and although I sometimes feel sad about what happened, I am grateful that I found out before we had children. I want to apologize to you, OP, for the hurt that your wife's actions have caused you. It's satisfying to see karma catch up with cheaters who become delusional and believe their affair will last forever. In this situation, your wife foolishly believed that her boss would abandon his wife for her, and that they would live happily ever after. It was like a fairy tale in her mind. However, I'm relieved to know that she eventually came back to reality and must now face the consequences of her actions for the rest of her life. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. I'm Mike Harrison, 50 years old, just an average office worker. I live with my wife Maggie, who's 10 years younger than me, and our 20-year-old daughter Karen. Tomorrow is my wife's birthday. I plan to take her to the aquarium she's always wanted to go to. And for dinner, I've booked a table at a French restaurant and bought her a gift. Plus, I've got another surprise for her tomorrow. Can't wait to tell her. I bet she's going to be over the moon. A few days ago when I told Karen about it, she said, "I hope Mom will love it," giving it her seal of approval. But something seemed off. Normally my daughter is very energetic, but she seemed down. So I asked her if something happened at her college. After pondering for a moment, she replied, "Nothing, just a bit tired. I hope that's all it is." But I told her, "If anything's bothering you, just tell me. Okay? I'd do anything for you." She nodded with watery eyes. Maybe she had a fight with a friend or someone dumped her or something. Kids don't necessarily want to open up to their parents always, so I decided to give her some space. Because of my frequent business trips, I often leave Maggie and Karen feeling lonely. That's why I want to make her birthday special. I only told Maggie to keep her day free tomorrow, so she might have guessed something, but I'll tell her the plan when I get home tonight. I'm sure she'll be thrilled. Man, I'm already so excited. Wait, why isn't my computer working? One of my colleagues said there was an internet system outage. I can't work like this, and suddenly we had the afternoon off. Thought of heading home, but since I had the time, I decided to hit the mall to buy a new outfit for tomorrow. And would you believe it? I spotted Maggie there. Hey! I was about to call out when I noticed her with a young man I'd never seen before. What's going on? Surely she's not having an affair, right? Even though I reassured myself, I couldn't help but follow them discreetly. However, shockingly, they started walking arm in arm like a couple. I kept hoping I was misunderstanding the situation, but then they entered a hotel. My heart raced so fast I could hear it pounding in my ears. Why didn't I confront her earlier? No, I was too stunned to act. Frozen with shock, I watched as an hour later, Maggie and the man came out of the hotel. Mustering up courage, I approached my wife and asked, "Maggie, what are you doing here?" She momentarily looked shocked and then lowered her eyes. The man with her hurriedly left my presence. Going into a hotel with a man in broad daylight? What's going on? Explain. She responded quite nonchalantly. It's just one affair. Don't overreact. And to think she was really having an affair. It felt like I'd been hit in the head with a hammer, such was my shock. I felt so dizzy, almost as if I was going to collapse. I tried hard to pull myself together. When I told my wife we should go home and talk, she said she didn't want to be blamed and would go to her parents' house today. Are you kidding me? I exclaimed loudly. Next thing I knew, she shouted, "I've had enough." Ignoring my protests, she hopped into a taxi and left. I ran after her immediately but lost sight of her. However, since she mentioned going to her parents, I figured I could confront her there later. That's what I was thinking at the moment. More than that, does once mean she cheated for the first time today? What did I do wrong? Lost in my thoughts, I trudged back home and entered the living room. Seeing my downtrodden face, my daughter looked at me with concern. "Dad, what's going on? Your face is so pale." "Oh, there's been a bit of a situation. I have no choice but to answer like this. I can't tell her that Mom has been having an affair. So, in a split second, I come up with a lie. Your grandma isn't feeling well, so Mom went to take care of her. It's been quite a situation. It was really tough. It was so exhausting." When I said that, my daughter Karen replied, "Oh, really? But she seemed to sense something. Are you lying? Did you actually see Mom cheating?" When I asked her what she was basing that on, she showed me something. It was evidence that my wife was cheating. I was at a loss for words, covering my mouth in shock. Karen then told me she had known about her mom's affair for a while. The shock was too much and I couldn't even speak. And the only one who didn't know was me. I was in a daze for a while, but I knew I had to talk to my wife. I tried calling her, but it seemed like she blocked me because the call didn't even ring. With no other option, I called my wife's parents' house. Even though she should have been there by now, they said she hadn't arrived yet. Where could she possibly have gone? Could she have gone back to that other man from earlier? As I was worried not knowing her whereabouts, my daughter said, "I can find out where Mom is. Just give me a minute." With that, she quickly checked the location services on her smartphone. To my surprise, she was at an apartment building nearby. Moreover, through the timeline feature, we could see where she had been all day. I was amazed by my daughter's quick thinking, but I decided to go to that apartment. After waiting for about 30 minutes, I saw my wife come out of the apartment with that same man. She looked utterly surprised, probably never imagining I'd find out where she was. As soon as she saw me, she looked shocked. The man quickly retreated back into the apartment. I can't forgive her. I can't be with her anymore. Unable to hold back, I confronted her about getting a divorce. "So, you're getting together with him?" I said. She replied, "Remarrying him is not an option. After all, he has a wife and kids." I was taken aback to learn they were both cheating on their spouses. It's disrespectful to their family to even come into their home. I retorted. She explained, "This is a vacation home he's renting." I didn't care about that. Arguing in front of the apartment would just cause a scene, so I suggested we move elsewhere to talk. She snapped back, "I've had enough of your lectures. I don't want to hear it," and tried to walk away again. At that moment, our daughter showed up from behind and urged her to talk things out. With both Karen and I holding on to her, we made our way to a nearby park and took a seat on a bench. Without hesitation, my wife spoke words I couldn't believe. "I'll gladly get a divorce. I've been patient all these years, but I can't stand being the wife of a dead-end office worker. And you know what? You're just an old geezer who's not good enough for me." She had the nerve to say that. How shameless can she be? Just then a voice came from behind. That's right. Turning around, for some reason my mom was there. Had she just happened to be passing by? After hearing my mom's words, my wife sarcastically said, "Well, isn't that surprising? I always took you for a dim-witted old bat. But seems you realized a gorgeous woman like me is way out of league for a scrubby mop like your son." As my daughter and I were taken aback, my mom sharply retorted to my wife, "A woman like you, who can cheat without a second thought, is certainly not a good match for my sincere son. Are you so dense that you can't even understand that?" Maybe you've got rocks in your head. What did you just say? My wife exclaimed, visibly angered. After a brief pause, she continued, how did you know about my affair? My mom then explained that my daughter had confided in her about it some time ago. Wait, what? My wife exclaimed in shock and confusion. It seemed she hadn't realized that our daughter had known. She assumed that it was something my daughter had followed me to because I couldn't come to the apartment alone with the interloper. Moreover, when my wife and her lover came out, my mom was on her way to our house after getting a call from our daughter. Mom said that as she passed by the park, she saw us and decided to approach. Despite all this, my wife turned to Karen and accused, did you set this up? Such an unbelievable woman. Enough already. Can't you see how much our daughter has been hurt by discovering her mom's affairs? And then to add insult to injury, she lashes out at me with words like, shut up and you're worthless. It's obvious that our relationship is beyond repair. My wife agreed to a divorce, so we've decided to part ways. Karen also agrees with this decision. When I informed my wife that I knew she'd been having affairs with 5 different men over the past 3 years, she feigned ignorance with, what? What are you talking about? I let her know that I've seen the photos on her smartphone as evidence of her past affairs, hinting that she might be looking at paying a hefty alimony. In response, she frantically began pressing buttons on her phone. Peeking over, I noticed she was deleting the pictures. Doing that won't help. When I told her I had everything backed up, she exclaimed, what? What's that about? She then lashed out, saying, you're playing dirty. I snapped back, don't you dare get mad at me. And she recoiled, clearly startled. I haven't told my wife, but it wasn't me who did all this, it was all thanks to our daughter, Karen. Karen had been suspecting her mom's infidelity for a while and accessed her account from her own computer to verify her suspicions by checking the photos. She saved those incriminating pictures on her computer. After a particularly rough day, I came home and Karen showed me those pictures. The images were so shocking that I could hardly bear to look at them. I can't help but feel heartbroken thinking about how distraught and saddened Karen must have felt seeing her mom like that. Though she saved them for my sake, just thinking about what went through her mind when she stored those images on her computer makes my heart heavy. My wife has always struggled with tech stuff, especially smartphones and computers. Every time she got a new device, Karen would help her set it up. That's how Karen knew about her mom's account details. Upon realizing her secret was out, my wife stared blankly into space, completely shell-shocked. She looked just as devastated as I had been earlier. And then, to add to her distress, Mom delivered the final blow. You could have been rich, but you missed out on a fortune, ha 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 ha. My wife, looking puzzled, turned to my mom. I decided to spill the beans on the secret I had planned to reveal on her birthday tomorrow. Turns out, my mom had won a whopping $7 million from the lottery ticket she bought last month. Moreover, she had promised to give that money to my dad and our family, and had already made preparations to hand it over to us. After hearing this, my wife quickly said she'd reconsider the divorce, but I made it clear that me and Karen's feelings remained unchanged. Karen spoke for my wife, who was very upset with me. For your birthday tomorrow, Dad had planned a whole day for you, including a visit to the aquarium and a fancy French dinner. With such a loyal and honest man as our father, how could you even think of cheating on him? It's embarrassing to think you're my own mom. Then, Karen confessed that she had known about her mom's affair for a while, but couldn't say anything. As she finished speaking, she ran to my mom, hugged her tight and burst into tears. It must have been so hard for her. She must have been suffering in silence for so long. I'm so sorry. I truly am. I'm sorry for not noticing. I gently touched her shoulder and felt her body tremble. I'll never forgive my wife for putting Karen through this. I no longer wanted her in our home, so I called her parents and explained everything, asking them to pick her up. My in-laws assured me they'd make her face the consequences and took her with them. After watching them leave, Karen said through her tears, "Thank you, Dad, for always working so hard for us. I've always admired and respected you. I want to repay your kindness from now on." I couldn't help but cry at her heartfelt words. What a kind-hearted girl she is, even though she must have been the one most hurt. I shared my feelings with her. It's me who should repay you, Karen. I don't know where I'd be without you. I'm truly sorry. It must have been tough for you. From now on, I'll protect you no matter what. I'd do anything for you. So please don't suffer on your own anymore. Karen responded, "You said that before, didn't you?" But seeing how genuine my feelings were, she said with tearful eyes, "It makes me so happy to hear that from you." I just wanted to reassure her. Suggesting we head back home, we returned with my mom. Once we got home, Mom prepared a heartfelt warm meal for us. Taking a sip of the soup, it oddly comforted me. Karen seemed to feel the same and said, "Grandma's soup is really tasty, isn't it?" Seeing us like this, Mom said, "Eat plenty and get a good night's sleep. Day by day your hearts will heal." She continued to prepare more dishes for us as she spoke. Only after a short time, the table was filled with food. "Oh my, did I make too much?" "Just eat more. Here, pass me your bowl. I'll serve you some more rice." Handing over my bowl, she piled it high with more rice. It's probably her way of showing care and love. I appreciate it. To be honest, I was so choked up that it was hard to eat, but I wanted to respond to my mom's feelings. Karen seemed to feel the same. We ate until our bellies were bursting. After eating so much, a wave of exhaustion hit both of us. Karen and I dozed off on the sofa, and Mom gently draped a blanket over us. Mumbling a soft "thank you," she responded, "It's the least I can do. I'd do anything for you too." I remembered those words were something she always used to say. It's no wonder we say the same things, we're family after all. Today felt like such a long day. I think I'll catch some sleep for a bit. With that, I quietly closed my eyes. The next morning, I was awakened by the smell of Mom's soup. For a moment, I thought my mom was still around, but it was Karen who had prepared breakfast. Seeing me awake, she greeted, "Good morning, Dad. Why don't you take a shower while I finish up the food?" I headed to the bathroom. When I returned, breakfast was set on the table. While eating, I commented, "This is delicious, honey." "Thank you," she replied, looking a bit bashful. Later on, wanting to avoid any direct confrontation with my wife, I wrote up divorce papers and sent them to my in-laws. I agreed to have my attorney handle the alimony and get her consent for the payments. Karen, sensing my distress, would cook delicious meals for me every day and even pack lunch. Having her by my side has truly been a saving grace. I vowed to protect her no matter what. After discussing with Karen, we decided to sell the house I once shared with my wife, and with the money received from my mom, we purchased an apartment. Karen decided to save all the money she got from my mom for emergencies. I can't help but admire how mature and responsible. My name's Clara. My life, you could say, was the epitome of ordinary, mundane to its core. That was until I met him, Eirik. It all began at a work seminar, a place you'd least expect life to throw you a curveball. I wasn't on the lookout for love, let alone an affair. But there was something about Eirik, an undeniable charm that I couldn't ignore. Our conversations were electric, brimming with laughter, and an uncanny sense of understanding. It was as if we were tuned to the same frequency. Sometimes, in those moments, I'd almost forget that I was married to Paul, who'd been my husband for a solid decade. With Eirik, everything seemed more vivid, more intense. It's funny how someone can just waltz into your life and stir up emotions you thought were dormant. Paul and we had a comfortable relationship, the kind that's warm but perhaps lacking sparks. Don't get me wrong, I loved him in my way, but with Eirik it was different. He was like a breath of fresh air, a secret escape from my everyday life. I found myself eagerly anticipating our next meeting, which was quite a departure from my usual routine of work, home, sleep, and repeat. One day, after the seminar sessions, Eirik and I ended up at the same coffee shop. It was unplanned, or so I thought. We chatted over coffee, and before I knew it, hours had slipped by. There was an ease to our conversation, a natural flow that was hard to come by. We talked about everything and nothing, our jobs, our hobbies, and even our dreams, which seemed to align in a strange sort of way. As I drove home that day, my mind kept replaying our conversation. I was drawn to him in a way that scared me a little. I was a married woman, and here I was feeling giddy about another man. It felt wrong, but at the same time it was exhilarating. The seminars continued over the next few days, and so did our coffee rendezvous. With each meeting, I could feel the lines blurring. I was stepping into dangerous territory, and a part of me knew it. Yet, there was another part, a reckless part, that wanted to see where this path would lead. Eirik was charismatic, to say the least. He had a way with words, a kind of poetry in his speech that made even the mundane seem magical. He listened intently when I spoke, making me feel like I was the only person in the room. It's strange, how starved you can be for attention without even realizing it. One evening, as we were saying goodbye, our hands lingered a bit too long. That touch was electric, sending a jolt through my entire body. It was a wake-up call, but not the kind that stops you. Instead, it urged me further down a path I knew was wrong, but couldn't resist exploring. Looking back, I can see how I got swept away, but at the moment all I could think of was Eirik and the way he made me feel. It was like I was living in a bubble, detached from reality, from my commitments. It's funny how life can be upended by something as simple as a chance encounter. And that's how it began, an affair that would change everything. I had no idea then how deeply it would affect my life, the lives of those around me. If I had, would I have stopped? I like to think I would have, but deep down I know the truth. I was already too far gone. So, it started off innocent enough, a coffee after work, then dinner. Sounds pretty standard, right? But one night things shifted. We crossed a line. I kept telling myself it was just a fleeting madness, a little detour from real life. Boy, was I wrong. Eirik and I began seeing each other more often. It was like I was under some sort of spell. I'd find myself waiting eagerly for his texts, his calls, the next time we would meet. It was a thrill, this secret we shared, hidden from the rest of the world. I felt alive, vibrant, feelings I hadn't experienced in a long while. Meanwhile, back at home, things with Paul were different. He seemed distant, or maybe I was the one pulling away. He started asking questions, the kind that have layers beneath them. He noticed my frequent absences, my mind being somewhere else even when I was right there. I became an expert at dodging questions and spinning stories. Just a lot of work, I'd say, or I'm just tired, that's all. But each lie felt like a tiny betrayal. It's weird how you can feel your heart squeeze in guilt, yet find yourself unable to stop what you're doing. Eirik was like a drug to me. Whenever I was with him, it was like being in a different world, a world where only the two of us existed. We'd meet in these out-of-the-way places, always cautious. But that caution, that risk, it only added to the excitement. I remember this one evening we had dinner at this cozy little restaurant tucked away in the city. It was like we were in our little bubble. The conversation flowed, the wine was perfect, and for a moment I forgot everything, my marriage, my responsibilities, all of it. The more time I spent with Eirik, the more I craved his presence. It was a heady feeling, being wanted like that, feeling that rush of anticipation. But it wasn't just physical, we connected on so many levels. We'd talk for hours about our hopes, our dreams, the things that scared us. He understood me in a way I hadn't felt understood in years. But every time I went back home to Paul, guilt washed over me. He was the same kind, loving man I'd married. And here I was sneaking around lying to him. It was a mess, and deep down I knew it. But somehow I couldn't bring myself to stop. You might wonder why I didn't just end things with Paul if I was so enamored with Eirik. I've asked myself that too, more times than I can count. I guess I was scared. Scared of hurting Paul, scared of the unknown. Scared of admitting that I'd strayed so far from the person I thought I was. So I continued this double life, juggling between the thrill of my secret affair and the increasingly fragile facade of my marriage. It was exhausting living a lie, but at that moment it felt like the only way. Little did I know it was a house of cards, ready to tumble down at the slightest touch. And as these things tend to go, the truth was inching closer, ready to shatter the illusion I'd built around myself. But back then, caught up in the whirlwind of my affair with Eirik, I was blind to the storm that was brewing on the horizon. As time went by, Paul started getting more and more suspicious. It was like he could sense something was off, even if he couldn't put his finger on it. He'd find excuses to check my phone or casually ask about my schedule, his eyes searching for something, anything that might confirm his doubts. The guilt was eating at me. I was constantly torn between the guilt of lying to Paul and the excitement I felt with Eirik. Every time Paul looked at me with suspicion, I felt this pang in my heart. I knew I was betraying his trust, the years we'd spent building our life together, but I couldn't bring myself to end things with Eirik. Then one day it all came to a head. Paul confronted me. It wasn't dramatic or anything, he's not that kind of guy. He just calmly asked if I was seeing someone else. His voice was steady, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. It was heartbreaking. I denied it, of course. I told him he was imagining things, that it was just the stress from work getting to me. But as I spoke those lies, I could feel the distance growing between us. It was like I was watching our relationship crumble right before my eyes, and I was the one holding the sledgehammer. Deep down, I knew I was losing Paul's trust. How could I not? I was lying straight to his face, and he had always been good at reading me. We'd been together for so long. He could tell when something was up. I guess I just hoped he'd believe the facade I was putting up. Living with that kind of guilt and fear is exhausting. I was always on edge, constantly worried that Paul would find out or that Eirik would slip up and expose our affair. It was like walking on a tightrope, trying to balance two completely different lives. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering what I was doing. Why was I risking everything for this affair? But then I'd meet Eirik and it was like all those doubts and worries would just melt away, at least for a little while. It was a temporary escape, a way to forget about the mess I was making of my life. I think part of me was also scared of what it would mean to end things with Eirik. It wasn't just about the affair or the excitement. I had developed real feelings for him. He was more than just a fling. He had become a significant part of my life, someone I cared about deeply. But with each passing day, the strain of leading a double life was getting to me. I was becoming more paranoid, more anxious. I'd jump every time my phone rang or if Paul asked me something out of the ordinary. I was living in constant fear of being found out. And then there were the little things that started to add up. Paul becoming more withdrawn, the occasional awkward silences, the way he'd avoid making eye contact. It was like he knew, even if he didn't want to admit it. Our relationship was on thin ice and I was the one with the hammer. It's strange how you can be aware of making a huge mistake, yet feel powerless to stop it. I knew I was hurting Paul, possibly ruining our marriage, but I felt trapped in this cycle of lies and deception. The affair with Eirik had started as a thrill, an escape, but it had quickly turned into a web that I couldn't seem to break free from. I guess that's the thing about affairs, they start as a small diversion, something exciting and new. But before you know it, they grow into this huge, complicated mess that affects everyone around you. And the worst part? You feel too deep in it to find your way out. Alright, so after about 3 months of this whole affair thing with Eirik, I made a decision that, honestly looking back now, feels like a whole different lifetime. I decided to leave Paul. Yeah, I know how it sounds. I was choosing the guy the first was having an affair with over my husband of 10 years. It was a painful choice, sure. But at that moment, being with Eirik made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I thought Eirik and I had a future together. Every time I was with him, it was like being in a different world. A world where I felt understood, valued, and yes, deeply loved. He had this way of looking at me like I was the only person who mattered. I got caught up in that, in the fantasy of it all. Telling Paul was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The look on his face when I told him, it's something that still haunts me. He was shocked, hurt, and I could see the confusion in his eyes. He couldn't understand how our seemingly happy life together had led to this. And to be honest, part of me couldn't understand it either. Paul asked if there was someone else. I couldn't lie to him anymore, not when everything was coming to an end. So I told him about Eirik. That was even harder than the initial confession. Paul didn't get angry or shout, he just looked broken. And that broke me even more, knowing I was the cause of his pain. After the confession, I moved out. It was surreal, packing up 10 years of my life into boxes, leaving behind the home Paul and I had built together. I remember walking through our house, looking at all the memories, pictures on the walls, little knickknacks we'd collected on trips, our favorite mug set. It felt like I was leaving a huge part of myself behind. Moving in with Eirik was exciting but also terrifying. It was the start of something new, but it was also stepping into the unknown. We were no longer sneaking around. We were out in the open trying to build a life together. It felt different, more real, and a lot scarier. I remember lying awake some nights, wondering if I had made the right choice. I had left a stable, comfortable life for something that was uncertain. Eirik was amazing, sure, but we were still getting to know each other outside the bubble of our affair. Real life has a way of bursting bubbles. Eirik was very supportive during the whole transition. He understood that it was a huge change for me and did everything to make it easier. We would spend nights talking about our future, making plans, dreaming together. It was beautiful in a way, but there was always this nagging feeling at the back of my mind. Had I really done the right thing? The first few weeks were a blur of emotions. I was adjusting to this new life while still processing the end of my marriage. I missed Paul in a weird way, not just him but the familiarity of our life together. But every time I doubted my decision, Eirik was there. reassuring me, making me feel loved and wanted. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs. Just when I thought I was starting to settle into this new life with Eirik, reality came crashing down in a way I never expected. It turns out I didn't know Eirik as well as I thought I did. And that realization changed everything yet again. You see, when you make a decision that big, you tell yourself it's for the best, that you're moving towards happiness. But sometimes happiness is a tricky thing. It's elusive, and what seems like a step towards it can turn out to be a leap into something else entirely, something you never saw coming. So here's where things really hit the fan. Just when I thought I was getting my life on track with Eirik, the truth came out in the most unexpected and painful way. Turns out Mr. Perfect Eirik was married. Yep, you heard that right. Married with kids, no less. His wife, who was often away for work, had no clue about us. I mean, talk about a plot twist. I was floored. How could I have been so blind? All those times we spent together, all our plans and dreams, and not once did he mention his wife and kids. It's crazy how you can think you know someone, only to find out you've been living a lie. The way I found out was pretty mundane, actually. I stumbled upon some mail addressed to him and his wife, bills, some school stuff for the kids. At first I couldn't believe it. I thought there must be some explanation, some mistake. But deep down I knew. Confronting Eirik was one of the hardest things I've ever done. When I asked him about the mail, his face just dropped. For a moment he tried to explain, to spin some story, but I could see the truth in his eyes. He was caught and he knew it. The worst part? When Eirik realized the jig was up, he panicked. Like full-on deer in headlights panicked. And then, just like that, he disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation, nothing. Just left me there alone, feeling like a complete fool. I was devastated, not just because he lied to me, but because I'd left my husband for this man. I'd turned my entire life upside down for someone who wasn't even who he said he was. The guilt, the anger, the sheer embarrassment of it all, it was overwhelming. After Eirik left, I was in a daze. I kept going over everything in my mind, trying to figure out where I went wrong, how I missed the signs. But there were no clear answers, just a lot of questions and a heart full of regret. The loneliness hit me like a ton of bricks. There I was, in this apartment that suddenly felt way too big, surrounded by reminders of a relationship that was built on lies. I'd wake up in the morning, half expecting to see Eirik there, but then reality would set in, and I'd remember he was gone. I felt betrayed, not just by Eirik but by myself too. How had I let things get this far? How had I been so naive? I thought about Paul, about our life together, and it just made me feel worse. I had thrown away something real for a fantasy. And then there was the shame. God, the shame was unbearable. I felt like everyone could see right through me, like they all knew what I had done and were judging me for it. I couldn't face my friends, my family. I felt like I had let everyone down, especially Paul. The days after Eirik left were some of the darkest I've ever experienced. I was stuck in this loop of self-loathing and regret. I kept replaying everything in my head: my marriage with Paul, my affair with Eirik, the lies, the secrecy. It was like watching a movie of my life and realizing the plot made no sense. I realized how much I had lost, not just my relationship with Paul, but a part of myself too. I had been so wrapped up in the excitement of the affair that I hadn't stopped to think about the consequences, about who I was becoming in the process. In the end, the revelation about Eirik was a harsh wake-up call. It forced me to take a hard look at myself, at the choices I had made, and the person I had become. It was a painful process, but it was also necessary. I needed to confront the truth, no matter how ugly it was. So there I was, dumped by Eirik and separated from Paul, the guy who had loved me through thick and thin. My friends, well, let's just say they weren't exactly throwing me a pity party. And my family, disappointed doesn't even begin to cover it. I had tossed away everything for a guy who, it turns out, wasn't worth a dime. The aftermath of my decisions hit me like a ton of bricks. It's one thing to mess up your life in private, but another to have everyone know about it. The judging looks, the whispered conversations when I walked into a room. It was like I was living in a bad soap opera. Every time I bumped into someone I knew, I could see the judgment in their eyes. "That's Clara, the one who cheated on her husband," they seemed to say. I felt branded, like I was wearing my mistakes for everyone to see. I wanted to shout at them, tell them there was more to the story, but what was the point? In their eyes, I was the villain of my own story. My friends, the ones I thought would stick by me through anything, began to distance themselves. Coffee dates got canceled, calls went unreturned. I guess it's true what they say about knowing who your real friends are when stuff hits the fan. And then there was my family. They were big on the whole family values thing, so you can imagine how well they took the news. My parents were heartbroken. They loved Paul like a son. My sister, who had always been my confidant, couldn't even look me in the eye. I felt like I had let everyone down, like I was a disappointment. I tried reaching out to Paul, not to get back together but to apologize, to try to explain. But he wouldn't see me. I couldn't blame him, really. I had hurt him in the worst possible way. I left voicemails, sent texts, but nothing. Just silence on the other end. That silence was deafening. It was the sound of a door closing, a chapter ending. I spent a lot of nights alone in my apartment, just thinking about everything. I missed Paul, missed our life together. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. With Eric, it had all been a fantasy, a break from reality. But you can't live in a fantasy forever. At some point, you have to come back down to earth. The worst part was the guilt. It gnawed at me day and night. I had been selfish, chasing after something new and exciting, not thinking about who I was hurting in the process. I had betrayed the person who had stood by me for years. And for what? A few months of excitement? I started to isolate myself, too ashamed to face the world. I'd go to work, come home and just watch TV or stare at the ceiling. I lost interest in the things I used to love. It was like I was there, but not really. Just going through the motions. The days blended into each other, each one as gray and unremarkable as the last. I was stuck in this rut, and I didn't know how to get out. It's funny how you can be surrounded by people and still feel so alone. I started to realize the full extent of what I had lost. It wasn't just my marriage or my relationship with Eric. I had lost a part of myself, the part that believed in love, in doing the right thing. I had become someone I didn't recognize, someone I didn't even like. In the midst of all this, I had a lot of time to think about everything, about my marriage with Paul, my affair with Eric, about who I was and who I wanted to be. It was a tough pill to swallow, realizing that the chaos in my life was of my own making. So there I was, alone and full of regret, trying to figure out where it all went wrong, trying to piece together a life that I had so carelessly torn apart. It was a long, hard road ahead, and I wasn't even sure where to start. But I knew I had to try to make amends somehow, even if I don't know how to say this, but I don't know if this will help me or not. But I have been married to my wife for 23 years and found out that my wife was a full-time swinger. And I was absolutely shocked. She is a school principal, and I never thought she had the behavior to do this. How could I miss the signs that my wife was sleeping with all these men? I was absolutely devastated. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I could not believe that the woman I loved had betrayed me in such a horrible way. I did everything for this woman. I worked hard to provide for her. I was a good husband, and I thought I was a good provider as well. Let me back up a bit. We did have a conversation about an open relationship, and I didn't want that, but I did not know she was already swinging. And she blamed me for not agreeing to the open relationship. She complained I was a bit boring and didn't want to try anything new. And that was the last thing she said about it. When I found out she was swinging, I didn't even confront her. I reflected on the conversation we had about me not agreeing to an open relationship, saying I was boring and didn't want to try anything new. How did I find out she was cheating, you ask? Well, social media, of course, and I don't even check my social media. I haven't checked Twitter in years, but for some reason I decided to today. And as soon as I logged in, I saw a notification. One of my friends had tagged me in a tweet. It was a picture of my wife kissing another guy at this club, which I later found out was a swingers club. I was in shock. I didn't even know what to do. I just sat there staring at the screen in a daze, but that was the day I decided I was done. I didn't deserve any of that because I didn't want to share my wife, and she decided she was going to do what she wanted to do. Anyway, I make almost 6 figures a year, a little more than her school principal job. But this woman had access to my bank accounts. Both of them. After gathering my thoughts, I went to work the next day and opened up a new bank account. One that my wife didn't know about, and started transferring money into it. It was slow at first because I had to be careful not to raise any suspicion. But after a few months, I had almost $50,000 in there. I also started looking for a new place to live. One where my wife wouldn't be able to find me. After I completed all of these preliminary steps, I decided to call a divorce attorney to see what divorce would look like for me. He tells me that since we have been married for so long and we do not have any kids, that it would be an easy divorce, but I might have to pay some alimony. I then asked the attorney, what if she cheated? Would I still have to pay alimony? He told me in the state of Texas, adultery can affect the outcome of alimony. But since we have been married for so long again, it would have to be up to the judge. Armed with this information, I decided to move forward with my plans. Part of my plan was to hire a private investigator to gather as much evidence as possible. Hopefully that will help me in the form of not paying a lot of alimony, if any at all. I called a couple of private investigators, but the one I decided to go with was highly recommended by a friend. After meeting with him and explaining what I wanted, I agreed and gave him a check for half up front and the other half when he completed the job. A few weeks go by and I don't hear from him, so I give him a call. He tells me that he has been following her, and that she is definitely cheating on me. He has gotten pictures of her with different men, all of which he has sent to my email. I thanked him and told him to keep up the good work. Fast forward a few weeks and I get a call from him telling me he has more evidence, but this time it's video. He tells me he has video of her going in a hotel with one of the guys she has been seen with on more than one occasion. I then forwarded the video to my attorney with a note telling him that this is what I have on my wife and her lovers, and that I want to use it in our divorce proceedings. At this point, my wife doesn't know anything. She doesn't know that I have moved money. She doesn't know that I have started looking for a new place to live. She certainly does not know about me filing for divorce. A few weeks have passed. My behavior hasn't changed towards her, still telling her I love her, etc. All the while, my private investigator has been gathering lots of evidence of her with different men, even taking these men to places her and I went to. It was heartbreaking to see all of this, but I had to stay strong. Remember, I was also looking for a new place to live and I found one. It was perfect. And my wife didn't even know it existed. I secretly asked for some vacation time at work and told my wife I was taking some time off of work to maybe do some housework. Her response was okay. Sounds like a plan, but that wasn't my plan. My plan was while she was at work, go to my new place and get it together and furnished. I was not going to take any of the old furniture to the new place. She can have it. It hurts that I have to do this, but it's what I need to do. That's where I am at the moment. I just submitted my vacation to my boss and just waiting for the right time to put this all in motion. I will come back with an update as soon as I am mentally able. TLDR. Just recently found out my wife of 23 years was a full-time swinger. Hello everyone. I promised to come back with an update on my situation. As you know, I found out through social media Twitter that my wife, she's a school principal, was a full-time swinger. I had moved quite a bit of money from the accounts we shared. And I started having my tech direct deposited into the new account. I also took some vacation days from work just so I could get my new place together while she was at work. My attorney has since filed for divorce on my behalf, and my private investigator has been gathering evidence of her infidelity. Well, a few weeks ago I was at the house packing. My soon-to-be ex-wife was at work. I hear a knock at the door. It was a process server with divorce papers. They were from my wife, but I just simply put the envelope on the kitchen counter. I thought to myself, this is perfect timing. I immediately stopped packing and gathered the information my private investigator had gathered for me. All the pictures and video on a memory stick took me about 30 minutes to put that together. So I resumed packing because I didn't want to be there when she came home. She usually gets home around 6 p.m. or so, but I had enough time to get my clothes and other odds and ends. I wasn't taking any furniture. At about 4 p.m., I had managed to get all of my things out of the house and head over to my new place, which is about 35 minutes from the house. Shortly after 7 p.m., I get this long text. She didn't call asking me what did I want from the divorce. I told her I would be willing to split the proceeds of the sale of the home with you, but that's it. I am not paying you any alimony. I told her, I think it would be in our best interest to settle this on our own outside of a courtroom. I indicated I already had an attorney. She interrupted me and asked me about the memory stick. I told her it was evidence of her cheating and I had given it to my attorney. She then says, I will give you the house if I would destroy the memory stick. I hesitated and asked her why. She then says, because I don't want anyone to see the videos or pictures. It would ruin my reputation. And she said, as a school principal, it would be devastating. I told her I would consider it, but when and if we sold the house I would give her something, but it won't be much. Fast forward a few weeks. My soon-to-be ex-wife calls and asks, have I thought about what she said in reference to the memory stick? She indicates that she has been stressing over that. I told her that I had, and I would destroy it only after I talked to my attorney. I called my attorney and asked him, what should I do in this situation? He said, you can have her sign an agreement or deed the house over to you, but you would have to file it with the county. I had my attorney draw up a quick claim deed for both of us to sign. And I told my wife if she wanted the memory stick destroyed, she would have to sign the quick claim deed, making me the sole owner of the house. I did destroy the memory stick, the one I told her I had, but I kept a copy for good measure. Throughout all of this, it seems her only concern was the memory stick. She never asked about the divorce or anything else. We continued with the divorce, but she agreed not to show up, and I would be granted the divorce by default. That's exactly what happened. 3 months went by, we sold the house for $475,000, and I gave her $100,000. I kept the rest. We didn't have a mortgage, so it was mostly profit. My ex-wife was more worried about her reputation as a school principal than the divorce. She didn't even care. I never thought this would turn out like this, but I think I prevailed. No long-term alimony to her. She got some cash, but that's because I wouldn't feel right. She put some work into that house as well. Anyway, I appreciate all the feedback that I got and thank you for all the support. I'm still in shock. She went away quietly just to protect